Welcome to another episode of Taking Inventory. I'm Daniel Druger with my co-host James Barrow. And today on the podcast, we welcome two special guests, Jenna Menking and Erin Kemp. James, why don't you tell us a little bit about Jenna and Erin?
Yeah, so Jenna and Erin are the co-founders of Crosswalk, a zero-party data technology platform, which they founded in 2016. They work with some incredible companies, including Abercrombie & Fitch, Hollister, Michael Kors, and more. And prior to founding Crosswalk, they co-founded Black Sheep Social Media Group, which was acquired by IPG in 2014. And they are just awesome people who have done a bunch of other pretty amazing things. So we're very excited to have you guys here. I think, just given that you guys are repeat founders and you've done a bunch of different things, I know you guys know each other for a long time. Would love to just kind of hear about your history and how you guys started building businesses together and kind of all that fun stuff.
Well, that was a great introduction. I think kind of the thing that really makes us tick overall and is really the start of our story is we were paired as random freshman year roommates at Vanderbilt in undergrad. And I think that for the contradictions to how we feel about survey approaches, the one survey that really, really worked in our lives is what paired us together as roommates. Jenna has a computer programming background, and I, plot twist, have a degree in vocal performance with music school. And we both graduated, and sadly, Google was not calling Jenna for a SVP position, and I was not yet on Broadway. So we did what anybody does and scrambles to get jobs in some remote industry. And we both ended up for a brief stint in PR for country music singers. We're talking about, kind of the inception of MySpace back in those days. And we were kind of really jazzed about the tech play and the programming element to socializing and to marketing and kind of the power of what that can be. And so really that led us into our first company called Black Sheep Social Media Group. And we built that to be the largest social media agency that controlled really celebrity-based accounts. So basically, when we were working at the PR company, it was quite the job. I can tell you, we started from the bottom. There was one day when I walked in, Erin actually was in our boss's office wrestling away a dirty pair of underwear from a dog under her desk. So
you do what you gotta do.
We really ran the gamut of what things were. But as we were looking at this, we really enjoyed the fact that we were working with these really well-known country music singers and we were helping promote them. But with MySpace and Facebook at that time, it was still college only, but we still had our Vanderbilt email addresses. And so we were able to get on to the platform. And what we really noticed was that there was this captive audience of young people who had access to liquid cash in a way that they would go out and spend. And this was still the days when digital music wasn't necessarily as great as it was now. And you would still go to Tower Records or Target and you would buy these albums. And so we slowly kind of looked at it. And the more that I would get into programming MySpace, my page was like extra glittery. It had Flash. It had all sorts of stuff that is now defunct. But what it did have was it had the music player. And so I would code it out with our artist stuff and I would start getting their new music out when it was coming. And so we kind of had this idea of this could actually be something. This was even like pre-Taylor Swift MySpace days. And so we started looking at what was becoming available. We really felt that this was going to turn out to be something meaningful and that as it grew beyond just college campuses, there was really the ability to kind of create a virtual handshake with another human that you've never actually met through just one sentence. And so we started Black Sheep really on the foundation of kind of being like, we want to kind of start a company and we want to do what's something that's not out there in the market right now and that's taking advantage of this. And when you look at it from a country music standpoint, we had these artists who were promoting lots of things and they had the well-oiled machine. So they had the radio promoters and they had the publicists and they had all of these things, but nobody was running this. And they were all not in a sort of digital first mindset where they could easily come in and code all of these things. And so we started Black Sheep to actually do that. And the value prop was let us build this online community for you and to really integrate this into the fan clubs that you have. And so it worked and it started. And we were so early to it that when we first started doing this, social media wasn't even a term. People were just referring to it as new media. And so we took this and it was really kind of a right place, right time where we started meeting more and more people. And it went out of the music industry and sort of went into Hollywood. And we made some really great partnerships with amazing talent agents and talent managers that believed in what we were doing and that really wanted to help give their artists or their celebrities a leg up. And I will say our kind of really big, I think, what put us on the map was when I believe she was either 13 or 14 at the time, we got an email from a woman named Stephanie Simon, who owns an amazing talent agency. And she said, I have this little girl who just is coming off of Broadway. She just booked a Nickelodeon show, and she keeps telling her mom that she wants to be on YouTube. And is that something you can help with? And so fast forward, that little girl was Ariana Grande. And so we started working with her, and she was really the first person who got social media. Our clients up to that point were all very big names, but most of them were in the music industry, but they were all older. And so none of them really understood that this was an ability to touch a community in a way that no one ever had before. And Ariana was really smart about how she thought about it. And she was a kid. She was really young. She was really brilliant about how she thought about it because she was kind of thinking, well, I'm getting all of my music digitally, right? That's where it's all coming from. And that's how I'm going back and forth with people. And I'm looking at artists and discovering them on YouTube and SoundCloud and things like that. So why wouldn't I just take advantage of that? And so we sat down and we started doing it. I mean, I literally opened her Instagram account for her. We would do it. And so with her, we really figured out how to make somebody go viral. And at the time, she was on a Nickelodeon show and she was just one of the supporting characters. She wasn't even the lead and wasn't who you are thinking of, Ariana Grande today. Right. And so what we were able to do with her was we were really able to create a fan engagement strategy based off of tech that enabled us to amplify what she was doing in her posts and to allow her to really reach these fans in a meaningful way. And we did it in a way that was really authentic. Ariana never wanted to do anything that didn't measure up to her brand. She never wanted anyone else to speak for her. She didn't want any of that. She just wanted to understand how to do it intelligently. And, to her credit, she's one of the hardest working people I've ever worked with in the entertainment industry for sure. But once Ariana kind of started going on the map, what happened was people were looking at it and social media was also on the rise in sort of the early aughts. And what was happening is people were like, this girl who's not the lead on this show, who at the beginning wasn't even in every episode, is now eclipsed the lead on the show and is now this #1 breakout star for Nickelodeon. And so it opened a lot of doors for us. And so we kind of kept growing. And since then, we have worked with every Real Housewife. We've worked with Mariah Carey, you name it. And the core of the tech that we built with that company was actually, I think if you saw it today, you would call it an influencer platform. But what we did is we hired a really intelligent, brilliant staff of people who had specialties in different areas. And we created this sort of content hub where they would come in and they would write things. So we would have one who created this persona of this, fabulous fan of reality TV. And we gave them a Twitter account, an Instagram account, a Facebook account,
Today you
Pinterest account.
you do it with AI.
Yeah. But exactly. But basically what they would do is they would come in and they would editorialize all of this stuff. And then we started doing different types of partnerships and deals to grow those followers. And so we had these accounts that could amplify. And so when we had people who had projects or something to promote, we would amplify them throughout this content management system that we created against all of these different accounts and profiles. And then we would utilize them in a way that an influencer would kind of have that megaphone now, but it was all sort of automated within what it was.
And we can control that story. So, there was an element of damage control. There were things that, if we needed to shift a conversation one way, well, great, we've got an army of people to help shift conversation organically, I guess, air quotes, in the direction that, that we needed. And I think all in all, I think the common thread, I know we haven't even really gotten to, this is our past life and kind of what's led us to Crosswalk, which we'll get to, but is that Jen and I have always kind of spotted like, hey, why doesn't this exist? Like, this would solve a lot of things, and just pursued that. And sometimes the simplest of ideas are that thing that just no one's put into action yet. And I think Black Sheep is a kind of example looking back on that is very innovative at the time. But at the time we were just like, well, let's just do this. This doesn't exist and this would be helpful. and we've just been good at identifying that. And I mean, that's kind of, it was at Black Sheep at that time that really, and with Ariana, that really we had the light bulb moment.
It's interesting to hear because we've talked to, I think last week or 2 weeks ago on the podcast, we were talking about how it's almost like the inmates like took over the prison when it comes to social media, and like the content creators have all the leverage, which like when you were starting this, that really kind of wasn't the case. You kind of identified it early, and now you kind of fast forward to like the Reddit revolts that are happening where like those communities are moving. And, in some ways, and we saw this at Snapchat where it's like, I mean, the influencers have way more leverage now than even the brands. Like when the Kardashians like left Snap, it lost like $10 billion in market cap. It's crazy to see it, how early you guys identified it. I guess maybe fast forward to today, which is like another example of I think where you guys have been kind of ahead of the curve, is now it's the people who have basically consented data have all the leverage, where 5 years ago, the walled gardens had it because they were basically the ones, all the information. So I'd love to hear kind of like how you guys realize that. I mean, now everyone kind of gets it, but you guys have been doing this business for a while now. And like, how did you guys catch it before all of us now are talking about it on podcasts?
For us, it kind of became apparent because as we were filtering through Black Sheep and right before we were acquired, we started working with brands. And the thing that was interesting there is it's a totally different monster than trying to build a celebrity who's a personality, right? You're trying to get somebody to buy a product or a service. And we were looking at it because we would have the analytics that came off of the platform. And at this point, Snapchat was around. So we had Snap, we had Meta's different platforms, we had all these things. And the demographics that it was giving us were completely different than what we were getting from the e-commerce sites that our customers were sending us. They were completely different from all of these other things. And it was all of this siloed information. And within it, we realized that there was really no one winning this game, big data, aside from these walled gardens. And so we kind of thought, well, all right, we know that two things are certain. Number one, there's true power in the aggregation of data. And number two, we felt like we as people are born with an inherent right to not only ownership of our own data, but digital privacy when and where we want it. But that said, we had the hypothesis that if you just told somebody why a brand wants their data and that they realized that it was literally just to sell you the right kind of products at the right prices and to actually give you products and services that you wanted and not to just go nefariously sell it all to Russia or China or whatever people think, that maybe people would be willing to give it to them. And so that was sort of the inception for Crosswalk, was to create a way to give people ownership and a say over their data, but to give brands the power to really leverage that data.
And as you're explaining that, I'm thinking, you guys went into this business when you started working with brands. There was a problem, and you came to the conclusion that this data aggregation was the solution. And how did you guys approach it?
I think it was really, again, kind of sort of right idea, right place, right time, even before it. And I think it was at that point, nobody really cared about the fact that this was sort of what we would consider as ethically sourced data as you can get. And I know there's a lot of connotations around that word, but what we did is we felt that if we had some really good partners to test this out with, that maybe we could build something meaningful. And the other thing that was happening, this was around 2014, 15, 16, that we were really seeing is that all of the big brands were using the big consulting agencies like Bain and McKinsey to go out and to do panels and focus groups, which no matter how great your intent is, if you're being financially incentivized to sit in a room with a brand with questions written by the brand and you're being fed and all of these things, you might in that moment believe that you would pay $500 for a purple handbag. But historically, when you look at your actual behavior, you realize that you've never bought anything except for the color black, and the most you've ever paid is $250. So empirically, no, you wouldn't, even though you say that.
I would say, to back up, I will say I could tie back to identifying that at Black Sheep, in an instance where, one of the things that was under our umbrella was handling talent deals and endorsements. And so there was a moment where a brand wanted to come to an artist and make a deal. And in that process, when they explained how they had gotten to, identifying a very specific use case was really honestly when we learned about how market research was traditionally done at this time and historically over time with focus groups in general. And I won't go too far into it, but honestly, it really comes from a place of Jen and I being naturally inquisitive on, but why? Why do you do it? Because with our historical understanding now, the world of consumer research and consumer insights and the world of the Bains and McKinseys and stuff was never in our wheelhouse historically. But we had a knowledge and a working understanding of how human behavior was applied online, about what resources were available there, but not being taken advantage of. So just being positioned on, well, why are you approaching it this way when it seems so logical to us to approach it another way from like this treasure trove of data that doesn't rely on asking a series of questions, but observes behaviors that empirically gives you a black and white answer to a question that previously has always historically been understood as a preference. Because to ask you, Daniel, would you buy this pair of shorts at $40 in color yellow? Well, in that room, in that focus group, you might very well say, yeah, man, I actually love those shorts. They'd be great for this weekend trip I've got. But instead of asking that question, I could have looked at your search history for the last year, or just the data around how you behave on the internet, and know that, well, actually, the qualifiers are the fact that Daniel has never bought a pair of shorts over the price tag of $20. He only shops at Target and Walmart, and he's never stepped foot in that store, and he hates the color yellow. So in that room, it is understandable that you might ask a panelist a group of questions that are answered a certain way and think that, okay, well, that's enough for me to make a decision off of. But in the reality is none of those answers are actually, they're also flawed. Because when you actually have the ability to just observe, well, how do people actually act in real life? You're going to make such more targeted, focused decisions on how to serve them well.
And I think that, now that I think properly tease the listeners with kind of all of the use cases, and we'll dive into some of those, specifically, but maybe give us just background, like what is Crosswalk?
So Crosswalk is a zero-party data platform. And at the end of the day, what we're about is about aggregating consumer behavior together to make more intelligent learning. So whether that's to help train AI, whether that's to validate certain things that you know about your business, or whether that's just to understand what size pants should we make. It's really giving our clients the ability to make smarter business decisions by having an unbiased view of human behavior from a sociological standpoint that's pulled from data, that's obtained in a really okay way.
I mean, I think, especially when you mentioned it, in the age of consumer privacy and concern and GDPR, CCPA, like everything around data protection, the opt-in nature is just so critical. And then as you've described, the use cases around it are, so much more nuanced than just asking the question or doing traditional market research. And so you delved into a bit of it, but, market research, as you described it, I don't think it's changed in the last 100 years, not dramatically. And so why do you think that is? And then kind of where we are today, kind of where do you think it moves forward, knowing what Crosswalk is doing?
I think market research has remained sort of in this stoic environment because it's kind of a product of its own doing, in the sense of when we look at brands and we look at all of these big companies, and I mean, I'm sure you guys see this too in what you do with market, but most of them, for the most part, you're in New York, you're in London, you're in Los Angeles, and you sit in a room with like-minded people that are kind of in this bubble in which you live. And so a lot of times you're talking to yourself. And so you as a brand think you know exactly who your consumer is, and you think that your consumer is, buying these luxury brands and doing this, and that you then de facto are considered a luxury brand. But In reality, your client, your end user, and your consumer is buying you off price at TJ Maxx, and they look at you as a Macy's brand, and it's really middle America. And so, because of that, as these companies, I think that are large and publicly traded, are being held to sort of different metrics. And I think that as digital marketing has really paved the way and through all of the kind of big DTC boom and all the venture capital that was put into there, I think people were held to different metrics. And I think that really the focus group has always been the one thing that's been consistent to be able to either prove or disprove in a way that you as a brand need for validation of one thing or another. And so I think that it comes there as a fundamental foundation of wanting to sociologically understand how and why people do what they do and to really truly understand your consumer, and comes from a place of good. But I think that when you think about it holistically, there's no way that putting together a panel of 200 people, no matter how great you've selected them and screened them, is really truly representative of your core consumer. And so in terms of where we see this going, I think that there's always going to be this kind of old school method of market research, because I think it's sort of adding on to the problems that are already there. But I think also, I do think there, and as much as we're kind of shit talking it, I do want to say there is value in it, right? Because an attitudinal piece is something that we can use our AI, we can use technology, we can use all of this to try to figure out. But at the end of the day, the reason that you abandoned a pair of blue jeans in one cart and then went and bought it somewhere else is something that you would have to kind of maybe ask with a survey in real time as you're doing it. And so that said, where I think the true beauty of what we have is that, yes, we're helping you understand market research with a different lens, but we're sitting on a vast amount of data that's both historical and current in nature that can model out to be predictive to help you really understand how trends happen, how you can ride those waves. And when I think the sort of icing on the cake is the consumer insights piece, to be able to then come in and say, well, okay, I thought all of my consumers really loved these brands and they watched these shows and they read these niche magazines. But when I look at it, you know where they live? They live in Milwaukee. They drink their old fashioned Wisconsin style. And this is exactly who they are as people.
And do you find our brands just bad at actually understanding their own brand? And maybe in parallel to how it sounds like how good Ariana was at understanding her fans, like, is it kind of, to me, it feels like what you're kind of describing is that, like, people understand people, brands may not understand people to some extent. Is that a fair description?
I think it's a mixed bag, right? I think we have, it's access to the data, and it's willingness to accept and understand things that don't jive with what you kind of think at your core. And, we've all been there where we've worked in a place and you get really jazzed and excited and you drink the Kool-Aid and you think that what you're pumping out is like the best of the best. And it doesn't mean that it's not for your perspective, but it just means there's a whole other world out there. And I think that when you think about brands, we've worked with Abercrombie and Fitch for the past, really since we started our company. Carrie Krug, who's the CMO, she was the CMO at David Yurman, and she took us over there. And they were really tasked with revitalizing the brand and changing the narrative. And they're a team who has they're the smartest team. There's a woman, Nicole Burke, who oversees their insights, and they're the smartest team. And so for them, they really, truly do understand their customer, and they understand how to properly use data, and they don't get caught up in the minutia of, maybe I don't like what the data is telling me. And so watching them action on it and really transform that brand over the past 6-7 years has been meaningful and fun to watch. But we have other clients who, because they sit in this sort of closed environment looking at the creative for their brand and all of this, I think sometimes it does get lost, but I don't think it's out of not wanting to better understand the consumer. I think it's just out of access to actual real data that you're seeing. Because when you go out and you have that focus group, you say, well, I think my consumer is this person. And so then the answers that come back from the focus group sort of feed the beast, because you've set it up that way.
It reminds me of something that we encountered at Snap when we were building out the ads business. Really, the DNA of the company at the time wasn't built around a self-service ads auction, building an ecosystem around the technology. And so there was a lot of education and some new DNA that had to be developed to understand ads, measurement, and everything that comes along with it. For companies that you're working with, and Abercrombie and Fitch has been around a long time, right? They, do you encounter resistance at the company level? Do you see that DNA has to change, or that there has to be buy-in? Like, how do you battle that, especially with more traditional companies that maybe didn't start as e-commerce businesses or didn't start as Ariana or on MySpace or something like that?
I think in general, because data is fairly real in our industry and in our world, and it means a lot of different things to different people, that there is a generalized learning curve. And so part of our part of what we're challenged with, and also that we really hold ourselves accountable with, is being able to communicate why the data is important and how to apply it. Because, like Abercrombie that we keep referencing, that team in particular is incredibly well oiled and smart and innovative. And so they're a very good example of a team who, first of all, trusts the data and he's really works with us in partnership, but also isn't afraid to action on things that they see on paper. They put things into action, and they seem to understand that holistically their brand falls within a much bigger ecosystem. So it's how do they take advantage of that ecosystem and understand consumers well enough to get in front of all the other noise out there. What they do really well is they really understand their own consumers, and they're less concerned with the image or the repercussions or the things that will happen if they make shifts. And what has happened in turn is that their earnings, like they are projecting increases, like they're actually profitable. They're doing well in a market where nobody really is. And I do think a lot of that confidently comes from the partnering we've done over the course of, 6 years in actually making moves. So in my mind, we reference it a lot because it's a classic example of all the work coming together and doing it.
But back to kind of the fear point, I think the people who grew up with tech are a little bit more acceptable to this and a little bit more comfortable using it. And people who are a little bit older, they still think, well, we should just go ask people what they think. So it's a kind of mixed bag in terms of who the client is and who we're coming in with. But it's really exciting when people do understand the power of what this data can do. And that when you're looking at trillions of records on a daily basis of the way that millions of people behave can actually be really meaningful.
On the flip side of that, are you ever worried, or your clients ever worried about kind of synthesizing down their customer base into thousands of little data points and saying, okay, here's our customer base and they're all ones and zeros?
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely. But I think at the end of the day, the fact that this data has come from people who are willing to share it and who are willing to let you be a part of their digital journey. And as you map that out is really, our CTO, Jessie, says this a lot, but she says at the end of the day, what we do is we take numbers and we put color on them. And so even though you are synthesizing them down, you're really actually painting a picture.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're really telling a story about how these people behave. And as much as what we do is numbers and it is a lot of math and forecasting and modeling and these things, it really is storytelling at its core. And it's looking at the narrative surrounding who your current core, lapsed, high value, all of these customers actually are in relation to the brand. And it's being able to have a sociological lens that allows you to understand that, to extrapolate meaning and value.
And I think that you might think that because we talk about data in numbers, and it's such I don't know, intricate subject in general, actually their output is not ones and zeros. The output is actually these creative personas, because the things that pull out of data, some are the things you'd expect, like where they shop, what they like, what they're interested in, their motivators, things like that. But also the nuggets in terms of creative value, the things that you can intrinsically then put into product development, into all of those pieces. It's really about how you're applying that. And the better you know your consumers, the more you know how to serve them in all of those different ways. So in a lot of ways, the hope for the output when we're doing our consulting work and that kind of stuff isn't for the output to be then put into spreadsheets to be, yes, there's one purpose for, appending data and CRM work and everything, but the other is really that full sociological understanding of who the people are that buy your shit.
Given the the scale of data you guys have observed, and just given also just like the like fidelity of it, given that it's all opt-in, is there any big takeaways you've seen about almost human nature and human behavior? I'm just sort of curious, do you guys ever step back and be like, wow, like we can understand people in a way we just like couldn't have really fathomed before? Or is everyone so unique that it's hard to sort of bucket some like commonalities around?
I think the one thing that I don't know why it still surprises me, but it does, is it doesn't matter what brand we're looking at. The number one thing that always comes up is porn. Like people are looking at vast amounts of porn and very interesting different ways. And so that is always, it still surprises me to this day that that comes up as high as it does. But I think what it really tells you about human behavior and kind of the overall big takeaway is that there's such power in this online world. And as AI becomes more innovative and smarter and more intelligent, and it enables us to see further into the future based off of kind of mocking out these different scenarios, is that people gravitate towards like-minded things and are in a symbiotic way to those around them. And it comes back kind of to where Black Sheep was too, is that at our core, everybody wants this community. And so whether your community is founded around a niche product, this brand that you think is really cool, or anything else, it still comes back to this, this unifier in this heart of the different community. And I think that what it tells you is that the internet, and I mean, not that this is stating anything that anyone doesn't know, but it is incredibly powerful. And that I think we as people have to really think through what that means as we kind of move forward as a society. So that's the sort of deep answer. And then I guess the superficial surface answer is everyone looks at porn.
And okay, so maybe that's a good feeder into kind of what we like to ask as a final question before we wrap things up. But fast forward 5-10 years, take your timeline. But where is Crosswalk? Where's the industry? And who do you think, or what do you think winners and losers start to look like?
I think Crosswalk, for us, I think it becomes more about AI, because I think the true value of what we sit on is data. And I think we help our clients unlock a lot of learning right now through more manual processes, with actually pulling it using data scientists to make meaning out of numbers. But I think the future really lies within AI. And I think that the winners in this space are people who can switch from a mindset of a focus group and a panel to understanding that rich learning can actually come from anywhere. And I think it's I think it's really democratizing data. And I think it's making data available to people who can't go to a McKinsey or Bain and afford to spend $2 million on a single focus group. I think it's the fact that we have AI out there and that we can utilize it to bring it to maybe a mom and pop shop that's got $500 to spend. I mean, I think it kind of wraps back into what you guys are. And I'm not just saying this because you're our friends and we're on this podcast, but I really think that what Market is doing is really special, because you're democratizing the data and you're taking it from something that's meant for these big walled gardens, and that's meant for these big brands to come in and spend all of these things. And you're enabling these brands that are smaller and that aren't publicly traded and that are held to not necessarily a shareholder coming in and saying yes, no, but it's these people who have put their life savings and their life work into kind of building these products online in a way that you're enabling them to now compete with these big guys. And I think that the winners are going to be the people who figure out how to harness that and to make it something that does a little bit of good out in the world. And I think that the losers, I mean, I don't even like to say losers, but I think the losers in this space, I think, are people who are scared to take the leap and scared to jump into AI, scared to jump into technology, and who scared to move fast. And who still are like, you know what a great idea is, Starbucks? Why don't you put a code for a free bagel on the bottom of your receipt? Like, I think that's going to be the losers. Yeah, I just want everyone to be happy.
I think, for fear of maybe going a little too far, but I think that's great life advice is, take the leap, move fast, do things that make you a little uncomfortable.
Have another episode all about our life lessons.
That's right. Thank you both for coming on, sharing your wisdom. For anyone that's interested in learning more about you guys or Crosswalk, where should they go? Where can they get in touch?
You can go to crosswalknyc.com. I mean, I guess you can find us on the LinkedIn. I think that's what people do. Hit us up with a link. I don't know.
We'll put it in the show notes so people can hit you up on the link.
We're not very social. Yes.
But thank you guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you again, everyone, for listening. We'll be back next week with a new episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend or subscribe so you don't miss every time we drop a new app. So thank you, everyone. Till next time.